All right, so do you love where you live? Is it a great place to work? A new survey by CNBC breaks down all 50 U.S. states and looks for the best places for business and quality of life. Let's start with the positive. It found that the Peach State, 7th overall when it comes to business, with Georgia scoring top 10 marks with regards to overall economy, infrastructure, and workforce. As my mom would say, we also have room to grow, a lot of room to improve, according to this survey, when it comes to quality of life in our state. It ranked Georgia 45th out of 50 and gave us an F, one of 9 states to get that failing grade. Among the metrics that led to the score were crime rates in Georgia, both violent crime and property crime. Also, issues with overall health care access and poor quality over the environment. So let's get inside the numbers now with Tommy Pearce, Executive Director of the nonprofit data and research group Neighborhood Nexus. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. All right, we all have our pro and con lists, right? Things we love, the issues we see around us, but these rankings seem to send a mixed message here. What's your take?
Yeah, it's interesting. I never really see Georgia in the middle of these lists. We always seem to be right at the top or right at the bottom. And so, my first question is always for whom, who is experiencing this low quality of life? Because I know it's not everyone, right? And so really trying to disaggregate this data is what we spend our days doing for organizations across the state. And, my take is that it's driven by huge disparities, right? So we have these huge gaps in Georgia that either pull us up to the tops of rankings or drag us really low.
That's a really important point, because Georgia has for many years been right at the top of the list when it comes to income inequality. So what might be working for one group is certainly not working at all for another group. So that's a very important point. So let's look at that 45th out of 50 for quality of life. How important of a metric is that when we're looking at a state's overall business climate?
Yeah, I think it's an important metric overall because it starts the conversation. It draws attention to say, okay, if this is a great place to be an employer, how do we make it a great place to be an employee? And that's a lot of families, a lot of working households across our state. And so, when there's a huge kind of index or a big number like this, I think this one was 135 different measures kind of all smashed together. We've got to really figure out what's driving this, what's behind the scenes, what's pushing us to the bottom so that we can develop a solution, right? You can't just solve quality of life by itself. You've got to understand what's driving behind the numbers.
Sure, because if a business comes in and it's good for them in terms of maybe finding affordable land and there's good incentives for the business, but an employee can't get good health insurance or have access to health care, that is a tough balance to kind of work out. So in your opinion, where does Georgia seem maybe most stuck when it comes to that livability measure, despite all that business growth that we hear so much about?
Yeah, there's a couple things that come to mind. Last summer, since we're in the middle of summer, right? I've got a 5 and a 7-year-old, and summer's all fun and games until you've got to figure out what to do with your kids while working. And
yes, it's true.
Last summer with Atlanta Civic Circle, and we found that about 75% of workers of the 400 or it might have been 600 folks we interviewed said that they're working fewer hours per week to handle childcare, and they couldn't find the right affordable services or programs for their kids during the summer. Well, that's going to impact productivity for employers, and maybe the solution lies on that end, right? Another thing I think about is how Metro Atlanta just moved into last place on economic mobility, right? Your ability to, if you're starting off in a low income family, your ability to get to high income by the time that you're an adult, Metro Atlanta is dead last among all metro areas, and that's driven by things like access to basic needs. We're consistently bottom 5 on access to mental health coverage, affordable child care. Preschool right now costs as much as college tuition.
Wow.
There's a shortage in affordable, quality-rated programs for kids across Metro Atlanta. But then you look at opportunities for quality education, workforce development, but especially wealth building. How do we create wealth for our kids in these upward opportunities for our youth is a huge problem, and it's not getting better right now.
How do you build wealth when everything you're making is going to all of the places you just named? Not to mention, we see the cost of rent and the cost of real estate climbing astronomically, particularly in the last decade, and affordable housing has been an ongoing conversation we hear city leaders trying to address, but it's really a massive bucket that they're kind of trying to fill drop by drop. What data should local leaders, do you feel, be tracking maybe more closely if they want to measure and then improve Georgia's livability in a meaningful way for people?
Yeah, I mean, the stat that keeps me up at night across the 5 core counties in Metro Atlanta, Clayton, Cobb, DeKalb, Fulton, Gwinnett, we've got 12,000 homeless students, public school students, right? That's 1.9% of the student population, which might sound a little low on a first take, but that's just upsettingly high. That's 1 in 50 kids. So you could walk into 2 classrooms, and statistically, you've likely met one homeless student that's either living in a hotel, couch surfing with friends or family, or in a shelter. Now we know that that's not evenly distributed, so this is going to be higher rates in different areas. And so, they're really focusing on the disparities, which, doesn't matter what you're mapping for Atlanta, but every map will look the same. The other thing I think a lot about is how do we build social capital for youth? Making friendships and connections across economic classes. But the last kind of data indicator I would look at is looking at what already works. Especially with wealth building, like you just mentioned, the Grow Fund and Kindred Futures have been, launching baby bonds programs in Atlanta neighborhoods and in a few rural places. And we know it works. They've done the research. So with or without state support, we know some of these opportunities are working, and the evidence exists.
So important to look at the hard stuff, right? Because that's the only way you can really talk about solutions. So let's talk more about those solutions. Could private sector be a big part of this solution in boosting overall livability for everybody?
Yeah, private sector has to play a part. I mean, we're in an environment right now where, whether you agree with it or not, there is less federal dollars coming into our state and our communities. And, traditional philanthropy, even if they wanted to, they cannot make up the difference, right? And so looking to corporate sponsors and employers, whether it's for policy advocacy, direct investment, or even using their platforms to promote solutions, we have to have the business community bought into this. And I know the Metro Chambers talk about economic mobility all the time. So I think it's happening. It just needs to happen at a bigger scale.
All right. Well, we really appreciate the insight and the conversation, Tommy Pearce. Thanks for the time.